Welcome to Awesome Movie Year, the podcast where we take a look back at an awesome year for movies, which is every year. My name is Josh Bell, film critic and writer, and I am joined by my co-host.
I'm Jason Harris, filmmaker, comedian, and I'm pretty hungry right now. Josh, bring that titty over here and let me get some of that milk.
Okay. Jason, finding the controversial elements in this film that we're about to watch, or that we're about to talk about. We watched it already, right? We did watch this.
I watched it.
I watched it too. It took me, I think, 2.5 weeks, but I watched it also.
Well, in your defense, you were exiled from your condo because of a political coup. So, you couldn't watch it until you were reinstated as a puppet governor of your condo.
True. Yes, I am now a puppet critic of the, I don't even know. I'm trying.
Manchukuo.
Sure.
You're Manchukuo's leading quote unquote film critic.
Yeah. And all I do is give positive reviews to Godzilla movies or something. What are we talking about? In this season of Awesome Movie Year, we're talking about the films of 1987, and we're here at the Academy Awards Best Picture winner, which is The Last Emperor, from director Bernardo Bertolucci. And I feel like, regardless of my personal opinion of this film, I feel like this is one of those Best Picture winners that has kind of been forgotten. That doesn't seem like it's much in the cultural conversation anymore.
I would agree, but this Oscar year was not the greatest in general, I think you would have to say, Last Emperor beat Broadcast News, good movie. Fatal Attraction, good movie. Hope and Glory by John Boorman, I don't think any of us have seen, and Moonstruck we already covered. Those are all good movies, but I don't think you look at that and be like, oh, this is the murderer's row that we get sometimes. Do you think so?
Yeah, I guess not. I mean, I love Moonstruck, obviously, as we talked about in that episode. And I love that it was nominated for Best Picture because it's not the kind of movie that you think of winning an Oscar, really almost of any kind. And I haven't seen Broadcast News in a while, but and ditto Fatal Attraction. I like those both, but I'd have to kind of revisit them to assess. But all of those three especially feel like very mainstream popcorny type films that you wouldn't necessarily expect to be nominated for Best Picture. I mean, this movie, even if it's been semi-forgotten, is a very stereotypical like Oscar Best Picture winner. It's this long ass historical epic.
Yeah, I think you're right. I mean, and Bertolucci made a number of different types of films, right? He was pushing a lot of boundaries. So when you say that this is like Oscar bait, you got to take into context that he really showed a diverse sense as a filmmaker. But, not just an Oscar winner, but I mean, this for the longest period of time, for a period of time anyway, it had the record. It swept, it won 9 out of 9 Oscars. And I think we've talked about some that have won more, English Patient and Lord of the Rings, but this was a war horse, man. Just kind of came into town and blew everything away.
Right. I mean, I think some that we've talked about were nominated for more and thus won more, but maybe didn't win everything that they were nominated for. I don't remember all the details. But yeah, this did win 9 Oscars, all that it was nominated for, including Best Picture, Best Director for Bertolucci, Best Adapted Screenplay, Best Art Direction, Best Cinematography, Best Costume Design, Best Editing, Best Original Score, and Best Sound. It was kind of interesting to me that you think usually movies like this that just get nominated across the board and are dominating these awards will also be nominated for acting awards, and there were no acting nominations for this.
I guess Peter O'Toole, considering what the Oscars are, would have been the choice here, right?
Right. I mean, I'm not saying that they should have been nominated. I just think that it's odd for that to happen. And Peter O'Toole was nominated, I believe, either for a Golden Globe or a BAFTA. So yeah, of course, he was a huge titan of acting at this point and the kind of person who would probably just get nominated for doing anything. So yeah, you would expect that. But I mean, John Lone, who is the main star of this film, who plays the Last Emperor, I mean, in a movie that's so dominant, you think that the main star of it would get a nomination as well, and that didn't happen.
And he's good in the movie. I mean, Michael Wall Street won for Douglas, Josh.
Michael Wall Street, one of my
Michael
favorite
Wall
actors.
Street. Did you know that was a harkening back to our Princess Bride episode when we talked about Andre the Giant? I believe there was a wrestler, Michael Wall Street, at one point in time where he was. It was IRS or Winar Shyster, Mike Rotundo. I think he was Michael Wall Street at some point. Anyway, Michael Douglas beat one for Wall Street. William Hurt Broadcast News. Marcello Mastroianni, Dark Eyes. I've never seen Marcello in that one. Have you?
I've never Dark Eyes. I don't think I've even heard of that.
Jack Nicholson, Ironweed, and Robin Williams, Good Morning Vietnam. And I believe you've told us you're not a fan of his performance in that.
I'm not a fan of him in general. I've never seen Good Morning Vietnam, though.
I'm just confusing you with other hater podcasters out there.
Yeah, there's a lot of them.
But I mean, I guess so. Neither of us are really in a place to say like who would we take out, and who would if we were going to put him in.
Right. And I'm like I said, I'm not even saying that he deserved to be in there. I'm just saying that it's rare, I think, for a movie to get this many nominations and not a single acting nomination. So,
Josh, tell me, what do all the nominees have in common that John Lone doesn't have?
Yeah, I mean, that's a fair assessment. But at the same time, this movie got tons of it wasn't like this movie was ignored because of that subject matter. But yes, that is a fair assessment, and I'd have to look it up again to just be sure, but it's possible that the majority of the behind the scenes people who were nominated and who won in all those other categories are white people.
Yeah. I just want to say the one for me that if you look at this, that and by the way, it's not all that, because the original score was David Byrne, Kang Soo, and Ryuichi Sakamoto.
Yeah.
So
yeah, I mean, in the other categories, though, I would imagine it is, but I'd have to check that to be sure. So yeah. I'm just assuming racism, which is generally a reasonable assumption to make.
I think so, especially for as you go back in time with the Oscars.
Yeah.
But to me, the one that I was really happy that won, even at the age of 7, Josh, I remember yelling, "Vittorio Storaro, this one's for you." I just love him as a cinematographer, and I think we talked about him recently on Ishtar, and I remember watching this, and while I was watching this, I was like, man, we were in our Ishtar episode, we were saying, what does Elaine May deserve blame for, and what doesn't she deserve blame for? But not letting Vittorio Storaro pick the shots was a huge mistake for her, because if you look at this, and his other work, he's incredible, man.
He is very talented, and there are some really striking visual moments in this film, which is one of the only things that I liked about it. And even then, as talented as he is, I feel like maybe the visual power of this movie was a bit overstated, or I expected it to be more overwhelming before watching this movie.
Well, he also won for Apocalypse Now and Reds, so he's done the thing. But I think the setting and the cinematography and the music and the set and costume design, so a lot of the technical elements are really the standout elements of this film.
Yeah, they are, and it's nice to look at, but not for nearly 3 hours. In addition to those Oscars, it won 3 BAFTAs and 4 Golden Globes, including the Best Picture award from both of those organizations. It wasn't a big box office hit. It grossed $44 million on its budget of $23.8 million. And so, that's okay. And especially for a nearly 3-hour historical epic, that's a pretty decent result. But for a Best Picture winner, you would think it might have been able to do a little better than that.
Well, you would, but you have outsized expectations. You were like, "Oh, the new Exorcist is going to make $80 million. Put it up against Taylor Swift."
What a random thing to say. I don't know what that has to do with this or anything.
Josh, is this the first time that you've been surprised by something random I've done in this podcast, Josh?
No, not at all. But it doesn't mean I can't point it out.
Thank you. You can.
Yeah.
Fair enough.
So critics were generally into this film. Siskel and Ebert gave it 2 thumbs up, and both had it on their top 10 lists for the year. Siskel had it at number 1, and Ebert had it at number 4. So yeah, they were definitely super into this film.
Josh, quick analysis. Number 1, can't get higher than that on those lists.
Man, you are not wrong about that. So true.
Well, as we've said, we're big math guys here, and
Absolutely. We're really
and
crunching the numbers here
yeah,
on this
and
podcast.
I did that in my head. Number one, that's top.
So Roger Ebert, in his review, said there aren't a lot of action scenes in The Last Emperor and little enough intrigue. As in Gandhi, great historical changes take place during The Last Emperor, but unlike Gandhi, the emperor has no influence on them. His life is a sad irony. His end is a bittersweet elegy. But it is precisely because so little, quote, happens in this epic that its vast and expensive production schedule is important. When we see those thousands of servants bowing to a little boy, for example, the image is effective precisely because the kowtowing means nothing to the boy, and the lives of the servants have been dedicated to no useful purpose. Everything involving the life of Puyi was a waste. Everything except one thing, the notion that a single human life could have infinite value.
Hmm. I mean, everything was a waste. Seems like a pretty major statement to make there.
Yeah, I mean, I think he is sort of right. I mean, I think part of the point of this movie is the idea that Puyi, the last emperor of China, was passive, that all this giant upheaval that was part of his life, and that he just kind of happened to be there when China underwent this huge revolution, that really he didn't have anything to do with it, and he's just sort of like pushed along by forces outside his control. I mean, like the becoming the puppet government of Manchukuo, of the Japanese, and everything, being arrested by the communists and supposedly rehabilitated, all of it just sort of happens to him. And to me, that was a very frustrating thing about watching this film, but I think that is on purpose in the way that Bertolucci is presenting his life.
Yeah, I was thinking when I was watching this about how badly you were going to eviscerate the children in this film. And
No.
I just thought, like, in a lot of ways, Puyi is not a likable character, but you have to, look at the nature versus nurture argument, which we've been getting to for a long time here on Awesome Movie here, I mean, he really didn't have a chance, right? Like, he got taken away too. He's like, you're the emperor. Everyone did everything for him. He was obviously, you grow up like that, you're going to be incredibly spoiled. So, I get that he was passive, but I don't think he really had a chance to be active in anything. I mean, he was an emperor in a tiny city without knowing that an entire country had evolved around him, right?
Right. And I think that is the point of the film. And you're absolutely right that, I mean, the circumstances under which he grew up are insane, and no person could become a well-adjusted person under those circumstances. And I'm not saying that the life of Puyi should have been different or something, like he should have changed it in order to please me. But I think you're going to make a movie about his life. It's hard to get into a movie about a protagonist who is this passive, and who not in it, even it's not even that he's an unlikable character, is that he's a blank slate who barely feels like a person. I watched 2 hours and 45 minutes of this guy's life and felt like I didn't know anything about who he was.
I mean, what was the dance move called? He liked to do the quick step or whatever.
Yeah, he
I forget
did.
what it was called.
I think that is what it was called. Yeah.
But I do think this is a trap in these kind of Oscar baity movies, right? Where you're telling such a big story and it's like, and then this happened, and then this happened, and this happened. And you're like, well, what is the catalyst? How does our character, our protagonist, relate to that? And I agree with you. This is like, I mean, look, I'm a history guy, and to keep up with all the events of history that happened in this movie is really hard. Like, it's a lot of research that you have to do to understand everything that's going on in here.
Yeah, there were so many characters coming in and out of this film, and in and out of, Puyi's life, related to all the various different political factions and circumstances. And most of the time I had no idea who any of them were. And so it was hard to feel an impact when something happened to those characters, or when they did something drastic related to Puyi, because I just wasn't sure what their motivations were, what the consequences were of their actions. It was all just kind of, I felt like it was all happening to me as a viewer too, and I didn't quite follow it. And, maybe I wasn't working hard enough to meet the movie on its level, but it didn't seem worth the effort.
I think if there's one character who you do get that from, it's Joan Chen's character, his wife, who becomes a Wan Rong is her name, and
Mm.
she becomes an opium addict. And I think like you do see her progression of isolation and loneliness, and obviously she's under terrible influences by like a Japanese spy slash lover. So yeah, I think that would be the character that's almost most well defined of their downfall.
Yeah, and even that, I mean, and Joan Chen is a good actor, but even that is pretty sketchy, I felt. So, Sheila Benson in the Los Angeles Times also addresses some of this stuff about the passive nature of the protagonist. She said, "It's supposed to be a story of inner peace through ideological retraining, a fairy tale story with a Maoist twist, intoxicatingly lavish on one hand, primly doctrinaire on the other, just the qualities that have piqued Bertolucci's sensibilities in the past. The sensualist, however, seems to have gotten the upper hand over the ideologue. The sense of Puyi's peace and joy after his release into modern China in 1960 with the title Citizen is lost somewhere. The remolded man casts almost no shadow, even less than the impassive emperor. Bertolucci believes that his late introduction to humanity took. Based on the film's evidence alone, his audiences may not be so sure."
I want you to repeat part of that in a second, but I do want to say out of that element of him kind of becoming just lost in the crowd, so to speak, becoming just another person. I think the point is that's what he wanted at that point in time, right? He had gone to prison, he had been exiled. This has happened over and over, and he's like, "Oh, cool, I can live." And he quote unquote took responsibility for the actions of his government. So I think when he was just a gardener, which if you read about Puyi, he was also like in politics after this point in time. He was on like, what would be considered like Congress for us. So I don't necessarily think that matches his real life. The way in the movie, it just seems like, hey, I just want to live the rest of my life out and not deal with all this drama.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's kind of what she's trying to say here, and saying that she doesn't necessarily buy it, right? That the movie is saying what you're saying, that Puyi has finally achieved this peace by being just another face in the crowd, a gardener who, in that final scene when he comes up to the parade of shame or whatever, nobody knows that he is Puyi, or that's not the final scene, that's the second to last scene. Nobody knows that he was once the emperor, and that's the way that he likes it. And I think what she's saying is she doesn't really buy into that. And I think that that's fair, is that I didn't feel like his journey as a person, if that's where the journey is taking him, was particularly convincing. I didn't feel like I understood him as a person, and it a lot of the time seemed like he was sort of a different kind of person from scene to scene, depending on the political context and depending on what the movie was trying to do. And it didn't feel like an evolution; it just felt sort of haphazard.
I think that's fair. Maybe I had misunderstood the quote, but I also think you could say that like he's just kind of like he's always I'm the emperor, and he's just going to go with the flow to keep him in that position at all times. Like when we're talking about the last emperor, at this point is what is he the last emperor of? Right? You could say China, but like it would be like saying, well, Queen Elizabeth runs England, or King Charles now at this point in time, right?
Yeah, I don't think
Uh,
Queen Elizabeth runs anything anymore.
no, but imagine if you were like King Charles runs England, but he's also relegated to just Buckingham Palace, and he doesn't know anything else that's going on outside of it, right? Like, there's a lot of complications going on here. Josh, can you talk? Can you just repeat that part of the quote where she was saying these are like the signature earmarks of Bertolucci?
Yeah, she says it's intoxicatingly lavish on the one hand, primly doctrinaire on the other, just the qualities that have piqued Bertolucci's sensibilities in the past. And she, in parentheses, cites The Conformist and 1900, which
Yeah,
I know you watched The Conformist just before this, but I haven't seen it.
I love The Conformist. It will probably be on my year-end list of first-time watches. And talk about Storaro. I think like that was in 1970, so These guys are like young and just taking like crazy chances, not just with the storytelling. I mean, this is also right in New Hollywood, right? So obviously they're in Italy, but I think those between the French Wave and New Hollywood, those influences are kind of convening with obviously what's going on in the Italian film movement. But you watch that movie and you're like, I can't tell you how many times like I had to like just click back 10 seconds to rewatch a shot because they're so incredible. Like it's amazingly shot and it's a good movie anyway. So I recommend it. 1900 is a 5-hour movie. Yeah, I think it's on Prime at the time of this recording, dealing with like different types of classes of citizens, of farmers, and he does a lot. Bertolucci always deals with like, you know, the quote unquote different classes of people. But it's a 5-hour movie, and today you'd be like a 5-hour movie, but today it would be a 5-hour, limited series.
Right. And I mean, this would be too. And in fact, there is like a 3.5-hour cut of this film that was released on television. And that is essentially like a mini series. So not that I would have wanted to watch more of this, but I feel like maybe that structure would have helped it in some way. I don't know.
There's a TV show, I could not find it anywhere here in America, called Legends of the Last Emperor. This drama tells the story of Chinese last emperor Pu Yi, his 3 ascensions to the throne, 4 marriages, 5 wives, and 5 exiles. So that extra hour, Josh, could have packed a lot in.
Right. I mean, they definitely have to streamline some of this and leave out certain people in his life in order to fit this even in the long running time that it has. So finally, Pauline Kael in The New Yorker was not a fan of this film. She said, Bertolucci doesn't intend us to see Pu Yi as the hero or the anti-hero, or even the comic victim of his life. Rather, he's a man without will or backbone who lives his life as spectacle, who watches his life go by. And since he experiences his life as spectacle, we're given only spectacle, a historical pageant without a protagonist. There's an idea here, but it's a dippy idea. It results in a passive movie. There's no toughness in Peplo's writing. The dialogue is waxy. And Bertolucci, given the opportunity to shoot the palaces and courtyards and labyrinthine walled paths of the 250-acre Forbidden City, works so gracefully that the movie is all vistas, all squat facades and heavy silks, red and brilliant yellows. The chinoiserie is pleasant enough, but Bertolucci's staging, Vittorio Storaro's cinematography, and Ferdinando Scarfiati's sets aren't in the service of anything in particular, and they make no real mark on you.
I feel like it's interesting that that's the last review, because I think we've kind of talked about all these things, right? So yeah. It's beautiful. It's incredible with costumes and the colors of the thing, but like the technical elements are the standout elements. To go further, by the way, what did she say? Chinoiserie?
Chinoiserie, which is like
amazing
Orientalism, basically. The exoticization of Eastern imagery.
I mean, look, this was the first Western film to be made in the Forbidden City since 1949. And that's pretty incredible. And also, like, I had read that a little later, another movie came in to film there, and they gave it 6 hours. Oh, here it is. It's not a little later. It's Shanghai Noon, Josh. Shanghai Noon.
Oh, yes. Fellow Best Picture winner, Shanghai Noon.
Talk about those Oscar sweepers. So, when Shanghai Noon filmed in the Forbidden City, they were given only 6 hours. The producers of The Last Emperor were given 6 months with full government cooperation. 19,000 extras. Bring the army out. Tell them forget there's a war going on. Forget it. We got to do a parade scene today.
Yeah, I mean, this was a movie produced definitely with the full cooperation of the Chinese government. And everything that entails. And if there's some criticism in some of those reviews of the idea that this is like a, pro-communist government film in some way, presumably that's part of being able to get it approved by the Chinese government so that they could shoot it there. And that's kind of just how you have to do that, I guess.
Right. Hey, you can come film this thing, but we'll just kind of, take a quick look. They said there weren't too many notes, and Bertolucci had actually presented them 2 projects, and the Chinese government chose to do this one.
So had you watched this before, Jason?
I feel like, I've seen this before, but I can't tell you when. I was wondering, you and I had a religion and philosophy class in high school with Mr. Baranoff. And I remember he showed us either in that class or another class, he showed us Little Buddha, which is another of Bertolucci's movie, and what was called at the time the Oriental trilogy, which obviously we would not call it that today. It was The Last Emperor. It was The Sheltering Sky, which does not have a good reputation, and Little Buddha, which is also good. So I wonder if I saw it in his class, but then you would have seen it, and I don't think you've ever seen it. So I have no idea where I saw this movie.
Yeah, I had not seen this, nor have I seen Little Buddha as far as I can recall. So I definitely hadn't seen this. I'm pretty sure I haven't seen that either. So also I might have not taken that class. So maybe you did see it. We had a history with him, like the regulars history.
Yeah,
But I feel
European
like that
history.
religion and philosophy, this is really important stuff about our high
Yeah.
school days. I think like that religion and philosophy class was an elective that I didn't elect to take, but
Oh,
maybe you
well,
did.
maybe that's where I saw it. But Josh, now that we know this, what else are you hiding?
I don't think I was hiding it. We didn't remember. I was taking The Mad, the Possessed, and the Dead with Mrs. Richardson, which was a class about horror fiction that I was
Mhm.
into
I
in
don't
high
even know
school.
who Mrs. Richardson is.
Oh man, shout out to Mrs. Richardson.
Who's that?
Jason has forgotten you. Let's move on from our high school reminiscing.
Josh, just to say, we could have had our old teacher, Mr. Baranoff, as a guest on this podcast, and then we wouldn't have had to spoken for the entire hour because he could have just gone on an entire rant about the politics, the movie, the history, and just done the job for us today.
Well, I'm glad we're here to do it ourselves instead. I had not seen this film, nor have I seen all that much from Bertolucci. Like I said, I didn't watch The Conformist. I wanted to because you were recommending it so highly, and I didn't have time to do that this week. The only Bertolucci films I've seen are The Dreamers and Last Tango in Paris, and from basically opposite ends of his career, but both of those very sensuous, erotic films, of course. And The Dreamers does deal with some political stuff set during the 1968 protests in Paris, but it's mostly about the sex. So not as much about all the historical stuff like this film. Dave, had you watched this before?
It really rang a bell, and I was wondering if I had seen it in school too. Like
Were
Jason,
you in my religion and philosophy
maybe I
class?
was. Maybe you were picking on me in the back of class. But yeah, no, I don't remember it though. I just kind of felt like I maybe had. So it's basically a first time watch. And I also saw The Dreamers a while back, and I remember liking it, but it's been a while.
Yeah, I loved The Dreamers, which I had never seen a Bertolucci film at that time. And I think that was when I first had started reviewing films, and I probably had it on my top 10 list that year, and I haven't revisited since then, but I like that quite a lot.
Yeah.
So anything else you want to say about the background of this film, Jason?
This is less about the film and more about the Forbidden City, Josh. There is a 1973 documentary that was filmed there, and that's also not easy to find. So give it a shot, Josh. Give it a shot.
Okay.
It's called The Forbidden City. It's by Lucy Jarvis.
I'll take a look. We'll come back and talk more of our general thoughts on The Last Emperor. Welcome back to Awesome Movie Year. In this episode of our season on the films of 1987, we are talking about the Best Picture winner, The Last Emperor. Not my pick for Best Picture of 1987.
Yeah, well, Siskel disagrees with you.
Siskel does, and many other people. I mean, there was a lot of criticism there in the reviews that I read, but overall, the response to this film was very positive. And I guess I can understand that in the sense that it does feel like this very Oscar baity kind of film, but also, as we've said a bunch of times already, like the technical aspects are impressive. It feels like an important story. I mean, it's going through these like major historical events. It feels like something that you should want to know about and want to care about. And yet I could not care about anything that happened in this film to any of these people.
Well, that would make it more difficult to enjoy it, wouldn't it?
Yeah, it did. It did indeed. I mean, did you feel like you talked about Joan Chen's character? So, I mean, did you feel like you understood these characters or you cared about them as people?
I mean, in broad strokes, I would say so. I think you do understand Puyi more than they're giving him credit for, or the writing or the performance, because I don't think maybe there are those deeper layers to him. I mean, and that's not a knock on him. That goes again, like how could anyone survive this and have, like you said, be well adjusted? I did think there was a moment here after he was reinstated as the puppet governor of Manchukuo, or the emperor, where the Japanese were really in control, that you could have done a really cool psychological thriller, right? About a man who gets reascended to his life right as the throne, but it turns out there are other forces at work who really control it, and every time that he goes against them, they can just do something terrible to him, like murder his baby upon birth, which happened in this film.
Yeah, and in real life too, apparently. And it wasn't
Yeah.
his baby; it was
Oh,
his
the
wife's
yeah,
child with a
the
servant.
driver,
Yeah, the
right,
driver that she had an affair with.
right.
Um, yeah, I mean, I think maybe part of it too, as you were saying, like it's so difficult to encapsulate someone's entire. I mean, this movie begins when he's like 2 years old and ends at the end of his life. It's hard to encapsulate all that. And I think nowadays, which I think is a good trend, is that a lot of biopics will instead pick one particular stretch, and maybe a movie that was just about that period, that Manchukuo period, which does seem like it's more fruitful for drama, right? It's because it's like he lost power and now he thinks he's got it back, but of course he really doesn't. Maybe that narrower focus would have made for a more interesting film that you could grab onto a little more in terms of who these people are and what their relationships mean.
I also wonder, though, if you would have had less understanding of the Puyi character, because I think you needed to see all that stuff with him as like a child, where literally the entire civilization is doting over his every move.
Yeah, they're like evaluating his bowel movements and stuff. I mean, it is pretty extreme.
Right. My little reference in the beginning of the breastfeeding, that is an awkward scene to watch because he is too old to be breastfeeding at that point in time. And no one really stopped him. That was his wet nurse, who was still giving him that milk. And it was just like, maybe go to the store, go to the 7-Eleven,
Yeah.
maybe go to the supermarket, get some different milk there.
Yeah. I mean, that I think is true to life that he did breastfeed until he was what, 8 or 9 years old or something. And then when he finally stopped, they sent away that woman who was his wet nurse, who was basically like his mother figure, because his actual mother, he was taken away from her when he was crowned emperor and didn't see her. And we find out, there's a scene here in the film where he learns that she's died, and they won't even let him go like to her funeral or whatever. But he hasn't seen her for essentially his whole life at that point. So the wet nurse is the woman who raised him, and they just also take her away one day unceremoniously, and he's not able to do anything about it. So, yeah, all of that does go to the idea of him being fucked up mentally, and I understand that. But I just didn't find it, I didn't feel like it went below the surface on that in any way. And maybe that, part of that is the direction and the writing, but also the performance. Sometimes you can have a movie like that where there's not a lot of depth in the writing, but you can get that sense from an actor just in the way they carry themselves or the way they deliver dialogue. And not that John Lone is bad, but I just didn't feel like there was much going on there.
I think also that type of diminishment of kind of the emotional range, or the kind of defeated attitude that he might have, could have also been shown more in the prison sequences, where he goes from literally ruling over these people to them telling him, "You're not our ruler and you're going to do what we say now," type things.
Right. And I think they try to show that a little with the idea that even in prison, people who were his loyalists or who were part of his like entourage or whatever. Or again, I don't know. Like half the time I was like, I don't know who this is. But somebody related to that, there are people who are still like serving him in prison, right? And at one point they take him away from those people and put him in a cell with people, I think is from like the Manchukuo government or something like that, who are not beholden to him in that way, and he doesn't even know how to, tie his own shoe or whatever, because he's
Right.
not used to having to do that. So, yeah, I think there's more that you could have explored there in a personal sense with like, how do you handle that? How is some person who lived their life that way handle this? But I guess I feel like we're supposed to believe in him, like, right, being rehabilitated during that period, or genuinely coming around to believing in the communist cause. And at the end of the movie, he's trying to stick up for the guy who was,
The prison governor.
right, right. His sort of not torturer, I guess, but they imply that there could be some torture here.
No, I think, well, where they didn't imply that is when Puyi was the emperor in the Forbidden City. And if you read about him, he was abusive to the eunuchs and, just was pretty terrible in some ways, and in the movie, he's terrible to animals too, which I didn't like. But it seems like that governor, because I thought that was an interesting dichotomy. You had two totally different styles of performance. Ying Ruocheng played Jin Yuan, the prison governor, and then Rick Young played the interrogator. And I thought Yin Ruocheng was so good in this movie. And I thought Rick Young, who's worked in so many other movies and has had such a long career, was so one note as the interrogator. I thought he was just, I'm loud, I'm loud, I'm loud, and it just had no levels. But I thought the prison governor really, if you wanted to see a character that had a point of view, I thought he showcased that.
Yeah, I mean that interrogator character definitely does feel like a little overwrought, and he's just he's like constantly yelling, and it's very melodramatic, and that was why I thought he implies that they could torture Puyi, or that they maybe have tortured other people if they don't confess in a forthcoming way, and Puyi does. I mean, he at one point, right, the governor chastises him for confessing too much, for basically taking the blame for anything that they want to put on him. So he doesn't end up getting tortured, but I thought that they were kind of implying that could have happened. But I just didn't get. It's not that Yang Ruocheng is bad in the role. I just didn't get the bond that they seem to be wanting to convey between Puyi and this prison governor, especially as we see in that penultimate scene where somehow, and we don't know how, the prison governor has now been arrested himself and accused of some crime, and we don't know what. And Puyi is trying to say, no, this is a good man. He's a teacher. And I just didn't what did he teach Puyi? How was Puyi's life enriched by this guy? I didn't get any of that.
I think it's also fair when you're saying that you don't know why he was arrested. And this is what I'm saying. Like, there are so many layers that are actually, this seems like an absolute insane time to be living in China, right? Like,
right.
There were warlords. There's the Forbidden City. There's China as a whole. There's the Japanese invasion. There's, I don't know, I can't even tell you how many wars are going on here, because you have World War II. You have the Sino-Japanese War, the second one. There's, like we said, there are all these warlords staking claims. Like, just must have been just absolutely nuts to like live there at that point in time. So yeah, I do think those elements are the difficult elements, and that's why I keep going back to like some of the beautiful shots that Storaro has created and the art design. Like, there's that one shot where it's Puyi's still like a little boy, and they're having like a celebration for his birthday, and the camera comes up behind him, and you just see like this glow of yellow, and it's that or orange, and it's the balloon, and it's just like, it's so beautiful. Like, it's like, you take your breath away beautiful.
Yeah, I mean, there's some beautiful stuff, and during that period where he has those like thousands of people just sort of there to worship him, essentially. I mean, this little boy just like running around, and then he turns the corner and there's these like people lined up bowing to him or whatever. It is pretty impressive to behold. And I think there's moments that are sort of sensual. And, again, having seen only these Bertolucci movies that are very erotic, and that is something that he's known for, is creating these erotic films. To me, the handful of scenes where we get that between Puyi like and his wives, or between Wan Rong and that the Japanese spy who comes in and is played by Maggie Han, who I thought was quite good. And there's that scene where there's some kind of lesbian toe sucking going on in that scene. And I mean, on the one hand, it's sort of jarring because it seems a little out of place in this buttoned up historical film. But on the other hand, I feel like those scenes were some of the only times where I was like drawn in, because he's really indulging in that.
I think there, to use another example, like The Favorite, Yorgos Lanthimos movie, right? Like, you could really get into the psychology and the relationship between the Empress and the spy that you're talking about. And I think that would have been interesting. Like, there's a lot of like these like quote unquote mind fuck situations that you could have really gotten deeper with. Maggie Hunt's character was named Eastern Jewel, Josh. Eastern
Right.
Jewel.
And
So
she's like, I think, like a fictionalized version of a real Japanese spy. And but yeah, that whole dynamic, like I would have watched that. There's that one. I want to watch the movie The Empress and the Spy.
you want to
That's
watch an hour, 2.5 hours of toast sucking.
right. Maybe not 2.5 hours, but some, these smaller stories that could have been expanded on that to me had more psychological depth
Well,
to them.
well, it seemed like, I like that the Empress, like, there's that one moment where she's like, the spy is like kissing her back. And she goes, I told you, I hate you. Right. And then they like have sex anyway. And I think that was like an interesting dynamic. And did she get the Empress hooked on the opium?
I wasn't clear to me. If she didn't, she definitely enabled it. So
Right.
it's possible that she did. I mean,
Well,
she didn't have honorable intentions.
no, definitely not. Jeremy Thomas, the producer, said of the approval process by the Chinese government of the screenplay, it was less difficult than working with the studio system. They made script notes and made references to change some of the names. Then the stamp went on and the door opened as we came. So that was pretty cool that, it's tougher to work with a Hollywood studio than a communist government.
Right. I mean, on the other hand, I have a feeling that like with a studio, it's sometimes hard to know what they're going to want. Whereas I would imagine with the Chinese government, you can pretty easily anticipate, you know, what they're not going to want you to say or do that would make them look bad or whatever. So yeah, I mean, and in terms of changing names, I wonder if calling that character just the Eastern Jewel rather than using the real person's name, because it was a Chinese
Japanese spy,
person,
right?
yeah, but she was a
Yeah,
Chinese citizen who was spying
right,
for the Japanese, and they might
right.
not wanted to mention that.
Josh, have you ever seen, and I have not seen it, there's a documentary about cinematography called Visions of Light from 1992.
No, I haven't. I think that might be a one film that we had had on a long list of possible films to talk about in our 1992 season.
That would be good because, one, I don't even remember us doing a 1992 season. Did we do that already?
We did indeed. And you
Uh,
can listen to that in our archives at
I might,
awesomemovieyear.com.
I might have to because I don't recall it. And two, in the film Visions of Light, Storaro talks about how he used light in this movie, and they were supposed to represent the different stages of Puyi's life. Red is the color of blood that starts the flashback, and the opening, the opening moments and the opening doors, its birth. And orange is the warm color of the family in the Forbidden City. Yellow is the color of the emperor's identity in the sun, and green is the color of the tutor's bike and hat that represents knowledge. And guess what, Josh? When watching this, I didn't get it.
I really didn't either. And I briefly thought of, talking about color coded films. Especially during some of those the like vistas of all the servants and whatever in the Forbidden City, I thought about Zhang Yimou and his historical epic martial arts films like Hero and House of Flying Daggers, which are very color coded and very clearly color coded when you watch those films. And this was a bit more, I guess it's a bit more understated with that. And maybe if you're aware of it going in, you can pay attention and see how that is. It's more subtle.
Did you know this was the first PG-13 rated film to win an Academy Award for Best Picture?
Well, I think the PG-13 was only introduced like a couple years before this.
Well, that doesn't change that it was the first one, does it, Josh?
It sure doesn't. Should we talk about Peter O'Toole? I feel like he's such a huge deal. Then that's a major element that we've barely even mentioned in this.
Yeah,
film.
I mean, I'm not going to say this was white savior guy, right? But this was like Western tutor. Teacher comes in, shows him a new way. And Peter O'Toole, we know, is a legend. But if you want to talk about a part that didn't have much meat to it besides what's on the surface, this was very like, Your Highness, I think that's a wonderful idea. Your Highness, I would go about this way, right? And it was like, let me answer your question by asking you another question, right? I didn't think there was much to that character at all. That was like a derivative character who was a real person.
Right. And that is the thing, is that like watching this, I felt absolutely that way. I was like, oh, look, here's the white person that they had to insert into this movie. But it is a real person. He was really a British
Johnston.
Yes, he spent many, many, many years as a colonial official in China and was actually Puyi's tutor and one of the only outsiders allowed into the Forbidden City and all that. So, I mean, he was a really important figure in Puyi's life, and in fact came back into Puyi's life later on after in the movie they show him leaving and never returning. And he did actually spend some time in Manchukuo, I believe, at one point. So
that would have been interesting to see.
Yeah, I mean, but I think you're right that the way they present him, it makes, if you don't know that he's a real person, you know, it makes you think like, oh, here is the obligatory like white person that we had to put in the movie to appease mainstream like American audiences at the time or whatever. And he doesn't really have a whole lot to offer as a person.
I don't think you say it like Peter O'Toole's fine in this. It's got nothing. I think the role itself just has very little to offer at that point in time.
Right, I agree, but I you know, he's such a big figure. I mean, and also as an actor where a lot of these, I mean, someone like Joan Chen has gone on to have a big career and is very, very famous, but at the time, these, you know, the Asian and Asian American actors that they cast weren't particularly well known. And so he's the one that everyone's going to gravitate to in terms of recognizing who he is.
The names they were throwing out for Johnston, besides Peter O'Toole, Sean Connery, who ended up winning Best Supporting Actor this year for The Untouchables. William Hurt, wasn't he also nominated for Best Actor here? For
Broadcast News, we were just saying, yeah.
Yeah. And the most interesting choice, Marlon Brando as Johnston.
Yeah, I mean, of course, Brando worked with Bertolucci on Last Tango in Paris. I could see Sean Connery doing it. I mean, he definitely fits. And the character is supposed to be Scottish, which Peter O'Toole is not really making any effort to sound Scottish. But obviously, Sean Connery is Scottish and never makes any effort to not sound Scottish. So it would have worked out.
Yeah, again, like it seems like we are in agreement of what works and what doesn't work. And it kind of goes back to what's on the page here.
Yeah, I mean, I think you liked what worked more than I liked it, and I was more frustrated by the things that didn't work than you were.
I think that's a good representation of who we are as people.
Okay, so do we want to rate this out of 5 emperors? I don't know.
Five emperors, Josh. That's what we're going with. 5 forbidden cities.
You can come up with something better. 5 forbidden cities. Let's rate it out of 5 forbidden cities.
5 breasts to suckle milk out of. Suckle that milk,
was
Josh.
Coming.
Let's do 5 forbidden cities.
Yeah, let's do that.
I gave it 3. It's not, it's not unbearable. It's fine. It's just not great. And the technical elements took it over the top for me.
Yeah, I give it a 2 out of 5.
You Tokyo storied this thing.
I really was like, I mean, I was feeling like, oh, it's fine, but at the longer I was watching it and then I'm reflecting about it, I was like, it's hard for me to come up with something that I liked about it, so I can't really give it much of a higher rating than that. So, I respect that it exists, but didn't enjoy watching it at all. So, Dave, how would you rate this?
I'm going 3. I agree with Jason. I think that, the technical aspects really, make it something. And I like the idea of it. It's just, it's way too long.
What did you think of the music? Because I thought the music was a highlight of it.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Really cool music. Interesting approach to like some of it being very traditional and some of it being kind of just using traditional instruments in a different way. Like it was cool.
Yeah. I mean, it's, the combination of different composers from different backgrounds with Sakamoto and David Byrne. I mean, that's a pretty big dichotomy there. So gets into something interesting. And we'll talk about those people a bit, I think, when we come back and get into the legacy of The Last Emperor. Welcome back to Awesome Movie Year. In this season on the films of 1987, we are talking about the Best Picture winner, The Last Emperor, and the legacy of this film. I mean, Bernardo Bertolucci at this point was a pretty big deal already as an international auteur. And, this
kind of just cemented his legacy as like one of the most major figures, I'd say.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, this being, his most highly awarded film, I think. But as you said, he went on to make this quote unquote Oriental trilogy after this with The Sheltering Sky and Little Buddha. And, notable films after this, including Stealing Beauty and The Dreamers, which, like I said, I recommend that one. I liked it a lot. His final film from 2012 called Me and You, which didn't really seem to make much of an impact. And he died in 2018. So your recommendation, Jason, is to watch The Conformist.
That is my recommendation. I'm telling you, it is wild and really showcases him. I think even, it's way better writing one, but also showcases his skill as a director, and obviously Storaro, his skill as a director of photography, which this also showcases. Storaro's still working. He shoots a lot of Woody Allen movies now. He's 83. Coup de Chance, the new one that's supposed to be really good. He was the DP of that.
I don't know who says that movie is really good. I think
The new one?
yeah.
Wait, isn't that the one that everyone's saying that's like the Match Point Part 2 or something?
I mean, I think that's like tonally what it's going for, but I don't know. I
it
had
seemed
read
like it was well received in Venice, Josh, which is in Italy, where Bertolucci is from.
that is so true. Yeah, I mean, I read a couple not positive reviews of it, but I mean, I think regardless, like it, focusing your career on late period Woody Allen films is not exactly the best use of Vittorio Storaro's
I'm
talent.
just saying he's 83 and he's still working. And if you look at, he does shoot a lot with Woody Allen, but he also shoots. I mean, Woody Allen shot with a lot of great cinematographers, right? So,
yeah.
But he's got like 6 projects in development. He's working constantly. I chose that one because it is it's a major upcoming release from a major figure, Josh. But I apologize. If you want, I'll just read up everything that he's.
No. I'm just saying that if that's what he's focused on, that's sort of a waste of his talents. But I was not realizing that he had so much else going on. So
yes, you owe Vittorio Storaro an apology.
I do indeed.
Again.
Sorry there, Vittorio.
Yeah. Hey, Josh, we're going to go over the actors, but can I tell you who I was so delighted to see in this film, who I love, is Victor Wong.
Yes.
Okay, good. I'm glad you like him too. Chen Bao Chen, who played Puyi's original tutor. He's just so great in everything. I watched Dim Sum, a little bit of The Heart, which is Wayne Wang's movie, and he's the star of that. And he's great in that. Wayne Wang says that Wong is like his alter ego. And as you know, I recently watched Chan is Missing, and I recommend these early Wayne Wang movies. Really, really specific, great pieces of Asian American cinema from the 80s when a lot of people weren't doing that.
Yeah, I've seen Chan is Missing, which I remember liking. It was a while ago that I saw it. And Victor Wong, to me, I mean, he's good I'm sure he's good in that and other Wayne Wang films. But, I immediately thought of him from his kind of genre stuff, Big Trouble in Little China. And I, not that long ago, watched all the Tremors movies. And he's in I think the first one and maybe one other one as this like shop owner in the little town where the Tremors happen. And he's in the Three Ninjas movies. And
yeah,
he has a very distinctive look. I mean, it was from having Bell's palsy, but, in a way it gave him that kind of character actor distinctiveness.
He's so likable. You just want to hug him.
Yeah.
And I believe in San Francisco in like the 50s and 60s, he was part of like PBS first as like a reporter and then as a photojournalist, and has been associated with Mark Rothko. But what I found interesting, like what a career this guy had. And then you can go and like mic drop him and then just be like, hey, also, did you know that Jack Kerouac based a character on me in the novel Big Sur? Did that ever happen to you? Did the most famous of beat writers ever base a character on you?
Yeah, he is fantastic. I mean, he has a small part in this film, but I'm with you that as soon as he popped up, I was like, oh, look, that guy. I couldn't remember his name, but, of course, that face is very recognizable.
Yeah, I thought, like I said, him and the prison warden were the two kind of performances that were really the most fleshed out.
Yeah, and that's interesting that actor Ying Ruocheng, who plays the prison warden, was also the vice minister of culture for China at the time that they made this film.
Well, he brought a lot of culture to this movie, so way to go.
Yes. Some of the more prominent actors in this film, John Lone, this was a breakout role for him, and for a while he was working pretty steadily. I think his biggest other role is in David Cronenberg's M. Butterfly, which is one of the few Cronenberg films that I haven't seen, actually. But he's in The Hunted and Rush Hour 2. He also worked a lot in Chinese TV after this and quit acting in 2007 And I was trying to see what he's been doing since then, because I mean, he's still alive. He's only in his early 50s at the time, so I'm not sure what he has been doing since then. But hasn't acted since the last film he was in was War, starring Jet Li and Jason Statham. So that's
Go
something to
out
go
like
out
a
on.
champ.
Yeah.
2 Golden Globe nods for him. You mentioned The Hunted, which reteamed him with Joan Chen. But also, Josh, we have to talk about his work in a film I haven't seen, but is on my to-watch list. Year of the Dragon, the Michael Cimino movie. I think all these Cimino 80s movies are getting more reevaluated by the day, and I'm excited to watch them.
I am not, as we discussed my non-affinity for Michael Cimino in our Heaven's Gate episode, but I look forward to hearing your thoughts on it.
Joan Chen, Twin Peaks, became a pretty well-known director. Shushu, the Sendown Girl, in Autumn in New York, and she's going to be in the upcoming Britt Marling series, which we're all excited for, A Murder at the End of the World.
Yeah, I'm really looking forward to that. And, of all the people, I mean, Peter O'Toole aside, of all the people in this film, Joan Chen has had the biggest career. I mean, and a varied career, stuff like Twin Peaks, and she works really pretty evenly back and forth between American films and Chinese films and, mainstream Chinese films, but also, art films. She was in a Jia Zhengqi film called 24 City. American indie films. I remember her in Saving Face, which is a really nice, understated American like lesbian drama from the director of The Half of It. And I'm definitely looking forward to A Murder at the End of the World. Ang Lee's Lust Caution is a great, great film that she's in. And I thought it was interesting that in the film 1911 from 2011, which is a historical drama co-directed by Jackie Chan, that deals with some of these same events. It's a Chinese film. And in that film, she plays the Empress Dowager.
The woman who kind of bestows the emperorship on Puyi.
Yes.
And that was another confusing element to me, is like, wait, why? Well, I mean, I get that she's kind of in charge of choosing who's next because of her position, but I wasn't really sure how they chose Puyi.
Yeah, that wasn't clear to me either. And even reading a bit about him, like he was related to the emperor prior to him, had no children, so didn't have a direct heir. So I'm guessing
getting into a King Ralph situation, aren't we?
King Ralph co-starring Peter O'Toole. But I'm guessing that was part of the reason. And Puyi was like his half nephew or something like that. So I don't know if he was the most direct descendant at that point, or maybe there were a number of descendants with the same potential claim and the dowager was allowed to choose among them. I agree with you, though. It was very confusing.
A lot of these actors, if you like go over their filmographies, like I mentioned Year of the Dragon, you mentioned Big Trouble in Little China, it's in a way like it's nice that they all got to work together so much, but it's also depressing of how few opportunities there were for Asian American actors back in the 80s.
Yeah, that's true. And because most of these, I mean, this is a film, obviously it's in English, so they cast Asian American actors mostly rather than actual Chinese actors. But a lot of those, people like John Lone and Joan Chen, for example, they're able to go back and forth between Chinese films and American films, to kind of fill in those opportunities that were maybe missing in American movies.
I love that. And I think, Steve Yeun has kind of done some of that recently, and I hope we see more of that. We got to chat a little about Peter O'Toole, Josh. He has tied with Glenn Close for the most Oscar nominations without winning an Oscar. It's kind of a bummer. I know they gave him the honorary Oscar back in the day, but he does have 1 BAFTA, 1 Emmy, and 4 Golden Globes. He's in a movie called Lawrence of Arabia.
Yeah.
And another movie called The Lion in Winter. Have you heard of these films, Josh?
I think so, yeah.
Okay.
And Lawrence of Arabia is a movie that this was compared to a lot, another big historical epic, about a figure who is kind of there during all of these major upheavals in history, and you can follow that history through the life of that character. More proactive, I think, than Puyi is, though.
Yeah. Goodbye, Mr. Chips, The Ruling Class. Is there anything where you're like, that you really love Peter O'Toole in?
Well, I mean, aside from King Ralph, I mean, I was looking at, in terms of the legacy, like what he did after this. And, in the later part of his career, he had some smaller roles. But of course, Ratatouille is great.
Yeah.
He brings such gravitas to the role of that critic, Anton Ego. A later film that he was in called Venus, that I think he might have actually gotten an Oscar nomination for that, in one of these, like, hey, you're a big deal and we're going to throw this to you for this smaller film, but I thought was quite good. So those are a couple that, I mean, Venus is one that I think is not as well known. Everybody's heard of Ratatouille, but both of those, in terms of his later career, I think are good.
I'm gonna throw out a recommendation. My favorite year, 1982, about Markland Baker. Yes, Larry from Perfect Strangers. He is kind of on set as like an assistant to Peter O'Toole, who is this big star of a 1950s variety show, and it's good. Actually, that's not true. He plays Errol Flynn in that, but you should watch the movie.
Okay, sounds confusing, but I'll give it a shot. um, Dave, do you want to say anything about Ryuichi Sakamoto, who just died fairly recently and is really
Yeah.
one of the most famous film composers out there?
I really enjoyed the score here, but I actually don't know much about his music.
Sakamoto was a pioneer in electronic music, synth music. So you can look up some of that stuff that he was doing over there.
I'll have to, yeah.
He also acted in this movie. He was pretty good, I thought, Josh, as Amakasu.
Yeah, I mean, he had a career mainly as a composer, but also occasionally acting. Merry Christmas, Mr. Lawrence is, I think, his most well-known acting role, his biggest part with David Bowie, which I haven't seen that, but has a very good reputation.
Yeah, he did the score for The Revenant. He has an Oscar, a BAFTA, a Grammy, 2 Golden Globes. Look up the song Energy Flow, Josh. Energy Flow. He also did the music for the Barcelona Olympics in 1980 to 1992. But as you had said, Josh, we talked about David Byrne here, and he's having a moment right now. Possible tour with the Talking Heads going on again. I'll be there.
Yeah, the re-release of Stop Making Sense, which of course we did a whole episode on Stop Making Sense in our 1984 season and talked a lot about the Talking Heads there. So,
and you got to mention Kung Su because he was the third member of that score team, and he's a well-known composer also.
Yeah, I mean, I think those other two are so famous, maybe they're overshadowing him, but all of them contributing to that very interesting score. Anything else you want to say about the legacy of this film, Jason?
I mean, there's a lot of other character actors that we could talk about, and they're all worthy of doing it. We're gonna, if you want us to mention someone, if you want to know more, just hit us up on the socials and we'll tell you more. Josh, I think the last fact I have to tell you is this: an Italian chef was brought in to cook for the international cast. He brought with him 22,000 bottles of Italian mineral water, 450 pounds of Italian coffee, 250 gallons of olive oil. I hope it was extra virgin, and I imagine it was, and 4,500 pounds of pasta.
Okay, that is a lot. Thank you for those statistics, Jason.
Marco Polo brings back the noodle, then spaghetti happens, and now we're making spaghetti on the set of this. See, it's full circle moment. Josh.
Yeah, cultural exchange back and forth. I hadn't thought about that.
Yeah.
So that is The Last Emperor, and that is this episode of Awesome Movie Year. As Jason said, you can ask us whatever you like on social media online.
Ask away, babies. I'm Jason Harris Comedy or Jay Harris Comedy on all the socials there, fellas and ladies. I am at, yeah, that's the thing. You can just find me there. I don't know. What do you want from me?
Your information?
Oh, okay. Jason Harris Comedy or Jay Harris Comedy on all the socials. We can also go for Jason on Letterboxd. Eat This Comedy. Show's coming back. We're at awesomemovieyear.com, Awesome Movie Year on Facebook and Instagram, Awesome Movie Pod on Twitter. Josh sent us those blue sky invites, so get ready.
Yeah, I'm waiting for it. So find some old things for me at joshbellhateseverything.com. I am at Josh Bell Hates Everything on Facebook, at Signal Bleed on Twitter, X, and on Blue Sky, and at Signal Bleed on Letterboxd. And if you are on Letterboxd, of course, connect with us. But also, if you watch one of our films, if you review a film that we've talked about on this episode, an upcoming episode, an older episode, tag Awesome Movie Year on Letterboxd, and we can connect with you. And we'd love to hear what you think about the movies that we talk about. And you can listen to our.
You just have to hashtag Awesome Movie Year, and then we'll find it.
Just add a tag when you log a film or write a review. Add a tag of Awesome Movie Year, and you can click on that and connect with other things that we have written. As long as we remember to also tag our entries, then we can connect with people.
One of our many assistants in the Awesome Movie Year offices will alert us to these tags. So
Yes,
tag away, friends.
yes, and listen to our producer David Rosen's awesome podcast, Piecing It Together.
Yeah, check out Piecing It Together wherever you listen to podcasts, and follow us on social media at Piecing Pod.
Jason, what are we doing in our next episode?
Josh, is it our friend Dave's pick?
I think it is. Dave?
Evil Dead 2.
I'm so
you're
excited,
undermining
guys.
Dave already.
Nah, Dave, go ahead.
I'm so excited. It's Evil Dead 2, of course. Sam Raimi, Bruce Campbell. It's going to be the best.
Dave, are you rewatching every Evil Dead in the entire subsect of Evil Dead material in preparation for this one?
I haven't decided yet, but at least I will be just glowing as I rewatch Evil Dead 2 for the first time in like 2 years. So I can't wait.
I look forward to that. Tune in next time for Evil Dead 2, and thanks for listening to Awesome Movie Year.
Thank you for listening to Awesome Movie Year. Make sure to follow Awesome Movie Year on Facebook, at Awesome Movie Pod on Twitter, and at Awesome Movie Year on Instagram. And if you like the show, review us and rate us with 5 stars on Apple Podcasts.
An All Points West production, produced by David Rosen in Las Vegas.